Brian is on staff with us at YS. He's the director of YS Search and Coaching. So you do lots of stuff that, honestly, I don't quite understand.
It's all right. You do a lot of stuff that I don't quite understand either. So
Perfect. But you may have seen him yesterday. His seminar was Leaving Well, Leading Through or Preparing for New Leadership. And that's an incredible aspect that I think a lot of youth workers, when they're maybe in the midst of transition, you need to be reminded about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just by show of hands out here, how many of you have ever left a church and gone to a new church? About everybody, you know. I mean, and so the emotions that go with that, you know, in terms of the decision to, you know, take another job at a different church, the students that you're leaving behind, the volunteers that you're leaving behind, or you've been a volunteer and received that new guy or that new gal and all the emotions that go with it. So that's kind of what we talked about yesterday, give different perspectives.
That's awesome. So you, the gist of that class was that, but then what were maybe one or two practical things that people walked away from?
I thought one of the things that we did, some of you, I see some familiar faces were there.
Yeah.
I got us into 3 different groups, and I threw a scenario up on the PowerPoint, and I had that group over there. Even though the majority of them were youth pastors, I had them think through what a volunteer would feel like when that youth pastor just resigned. The back group was the search committee or the elders that just heard that news, and what are they thinking? And then the youth pastors themselves that are like, all right, but more money, that's why we're going, you know.
Yeah.
And so we did that, but then we shifted, and so then people had to take on a different persona just to think through what's that feel like. And then I intentionally didn't have anybody be the student, because that's often in transition the group that we forget about the most.
Oh, wow.
The very group that we are ministering to, we forget about. So
Yeah, that's incredible. So, but backing up before that, I know a lot of times the stories that I hear from youth workers are that they left a church after it had gotten way out of hand, after things had gotten so unhealthy that the only thing they could do was leave ministry completely or leave the church. So how do you assess where the health of your ministry is in that process? Not that everyone leaves a church because it's unhealthy, but how would you suggest, as a director of YS Coaching, you're pouring into youth pastors all the time, what are some key things that you give them to look at as kind of a litmus test of how they're doing?
Yeah, well, first of all, don't do it on your own. Don't be your own litmus test too. Hopefully, not only within your own staff, your own church culture, do you have somebody or somebodies that you can be kind of talking with and having those conversations. But it's laid out biblically in terms of relationship. God designed us to be in relationship, but when we have hierarchy, that sometimes that kind of comes in the way. I really suggest people get involved with networks, being part of a youth pastor network, youth worker network, and if you're a volunteer, make sure that you're talking with other people in a similar position and feeling what they're feeling and stuff. But in terms of assessing the health of your own ministry and feeling like you're effective or not effective, hearing from the parent, understand that sometimes that voice of the parent is the voice, and I hate to say this, but sometimes can be the voice of the evil one. We know that the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy, and just because there's a parent that says you're not spending enough time with my kid doesn't mean that you're not spending enough time with the kids. Sometimes we are just separated, and we're not the personality that should reach that person. That's why we bring in volunteers. We ask the Lord of the harvest field to provide harvest workers so that it's not just us. It's one body, it's many parts.
So you've been speaking to youth and in youth ministry for such a long time. Tell us a little bit about your history, and maybe, if you wouldn't mind, sharing just a little bit of honesty about maybe some times when you've realized that the ministry you were working in could be healthier, or maybe some success stories of how you turned that around.
So I was 17 years as a youth pastor, and now 6 years removed from that, but continued to be in youth ministry, primarily through Young Life and volunteering that way in those last few years. But this year, I cycled back in as the 7th grade boys leader. So I have a youth pastor that I'm an elder over, and so in some ways I oversee him. But then when we come to Sunday or Wednesday, I'm subordinate. You know, I'm coming in and saying, Ben, lead me. You know, because I'm a 7th grade guys leader. Primarily just because I have a 7th grade daughter, so I need to disciple those guys, and so I want to be alongside those dudes. But as 17 years as a youth pastor, primarily in 3 different churches, man, we all know you go on the roller coaster in terms of your own doubts, your own successes, the things you believe about yourself, the compliments that you get. That's like, whoa, head's getting big, you know. And there were times where I wanted to repeat. I'd go from one church to the next, and instead of really assessing the student culture, I'd want to implement what I did in the last place, and just try to recreate that. And that was not being sensitive to what was going on. In one case in particular, a church rolled out the red carpet for us, and I was in a church that had grown pretty big, and I thought, I can take on bigger. And so I was recruited to a church of 2,000 plus, a youth group of 200 plus, and I got in there, and I tried to do what I felt like was going to be best, rather than to really assess and hear from the Spirit, hear from the people, take some time to listen. And it was that one that we don't want on our resume. 19 months in one position, and I was like, man, I don't want that. I want longevity. So, and there's a lot of us out here that have gone to a place and discovered it's not a fit, and sometimes it's because of us, and sometimes it is because of the church.
Well, what you mentioned about a roller coaster in ministry, it makes me think of Mike Yaconelli. One of my favorite quotes is that how he talked about how he ungrew a church down from like a massive church down to just a couple hundred people. And so a lot of times I think as youth workers, it's easy for us to get caught up in the idea of we're being a success, we're running a successful ministry when the numbers are there. But when the numbers go down, we feel like that's a sign of us not being a success. And so how do we fight that, and how do we determine that we truly are healthy even if the numbers quite aren't there or quite what we would like them to be on a Wednesday night?
I think a lot of it has to do with having a philosophy of ministry that the whole agrees upon. And so if the philosophy of ministry is one of growth, you can actually kind of create some tangible outcomes. That growth, if that is truly the vision. I never had one of those that I said it has to be about growth. The natural outcome of our philosophy became growth sometimes, but it was really relational connectedness. We wanted people to be able to have avenues to connect with God and connect with others. Taking God's law and summarizing it, love God, love others, that's what we wanted. Now, the end result often was growth, because that's what we concentrated on, meeting our vision, meeting that philosophy of relational connectedness. But there were times, sometimes like our youth group right now, our youth pastor could easily get a raise because he's doubled the size of the youth group. Now, that's a number. Numbers lie. What I didn't say was that we had 25 kids come into the 7th grade, graduate from 6th grade. Ben did nothing to get them. The parents, 12 years, 9 months ago did that to be able to get, a massive growth in our youth group. So that's why the group doubled, was because of that. So numbers are going to ebb and flow. Now, the key is for us to capture those 25 7th graders and have relationship with them so they can grow in God and grow with others.